With 63 euros in her coat pocket and 2 suitcases packed in 40 minutes, 63-year-old Colette Morel watched her son-in-law check his watch through the windshield, a man with other things scheduled after this. Her daughter had pressed a pen into her hand that morning in a notary's office, her voice soft in the way that lands harder than shouting. The house went to Sylvie. The pension Henri had left her went to Sylvie. The locks were changed before the ink was dry. But what Sylvie didn't know, what no one in that quiet office could have foreseen, was that Henri had whispered something to Colette the last summer before he died. Something hidden. Something they had never thought to look for. They said a woman her age, with nothing, in winter, was already finished. They were wrong about all of it. This is the story of how a woman they reduced to a signature rebuilt herself stone by stone. How a secret a dying man left behind became the thread that unraveled everything. And how the people who took the house never understood that the house was never the point. If this story touches you in any way, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment so I know you are still here. The notary sat behind his desk the way men sit when they have already made up their minds. Straight-backed, unhurried, a clean pen waiting at the edge of the blotter. The office smelled of wood polish and paper. Outside, Lyon moved through its afternoon without any awareness that something irreversible was happening on the 3rd floor of a building on Rue de la République. Colette Morel sat at the edge of her chair and could not quite understand how she had come to be here. 63 years old. She had thought by now that she understood what loss looked like. She had buried Henri 2 years ago. She had survived the first winter alone, then the second. She had learned to cook for one and to sleep on her side of the bed without reaching across. She had believed that was the shape of the worst thing. She had been wrong. Sylvie stood to her right, 41 years old, a pale grey jacket, the expression of a woman who is deeply professionally concerned. Not guilt, not grief, concern, rehearsed and ready for any objection. Grégoire stood by the window looking at his phone. He had barely looked at his mother-in-law since they arrived. The notary read the summary aloud. A document declaring Colette Morel unable to manage her own affairs independently. The house on Rue des Acacias transferred to Sylvie's guardianship. Henri's widow pension, which Colette had received for 2 years, also transferred. "Wait," said Colette. "I never agreed to any of this." "Maman," Sylvie's voice dropped into softness, and that softness landed harder than anything else. "This is for your safety. You left the stove on twice last month. Twice. We can't keep worrying the way we've been worrying." "The notary has reviewed everything," Sylvie added, touching Colette's shoulder briefly. "These are just documents. Sign and we'll go home." The notary was already turning pages, slowly, without urgency, like a man certain of the outcome. He had been persuaded before Colette had opened her mouth. She felt that clearly. She picked up the pen because it was in front of her, because the words she needed had not arrived in time, because Sylvie's hand was still warm on her shoulder, and the room was very quiet, and she didn't know what else to do. An hour later, she stood at the door of her own home with 2 suitcases at her feet. 40 minutes, Sylvie had said. Take what you need most. Grégoire stayed in the car. Through the windshield, Colette could see him checking his watch, then checking it again. A man with other things scheduled after this. She went inside. Her hands worked without instruction. Documents, photographs, a sweater from the bottom drawer, 2 books with the bookmarks still in them. It was better not to think. Thinking meant thinking about everything at once, and then you would not be able to move at all. In the bedroom, she stopped. The wardrobe door was slightly open. The right hinge had been loose for 2 years. Henri had meant to fix it and never got around to it. His coat hung on the inside rail. Dark navy wool, the left cuff worn thin at the edge. She did not take it. She put her palm flat against the fabric and stood there until something inside her settled enough to breathe. And then she remembered. The last summer before he died. Evening, the porch, his hand holding hers while he looked out toward the garden, speaking quietly, almost not to her, almost to the air beside her. If everything falls apart, Colette, look under the front porch. Promise me you won't forget. She had laughed. She had asked what he'd hidden there. Treasure? He hadn't answered. He had only held her hand a little tighter. She walked out to the porch, 3 steps of old limestone. The boards of the landing had darkened over the winter. She knelt down on the ground and reached toward the edge of the far board, where a shadow ran between the wood and the earth. A horn sounded from the car, sharp, then again. Maman! Sylvie appeared in the doorway. We need to go, right now. One moment. Grégoire has to be somewhere. Colette looked at the ground beneath the boards. Her fingers had not yet touched it. She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked to the car without turning back. In the car, Grégoire started the engine immediately. Sylvie said something about peace of mind and fresh starts, and how this was better for everyone. Colette watched the window. Rue des Acacias fell away behind them. The house, the gate, the old linden tree she and Henri had talked about cutting down and never did. Then the street was gone. Henri had hidden something under that porch. She hadn't reached it. But he had asked her to remember, and she had remembered. And that was the one thing they had not managed to take from her yet. Madeleine Brossard lived 4 houses down and had turned 78 that spring. When Colette appeared at her door with 2 suitcases and no more explanation than Sylvie has taken the house, Madeleine looked at her for a moment and stepped aside without a word. She gave her the spare room, a single bed with a yellow blanket, a window facing the neighbor's wall. She came back with a bowl of vegetable soup, set it on the dresser, and left without asking a single question. That was the most generous thing anyone had done for Colette in months. She did not sleep. She lay in her coat on top of the blanket and listened to the house settle around her and thought about the pen in her hand, the notary turning pages without pausing, Sylvie's palm warm on her shoulder, the ink drying before she had fully understood what she had signed. Over the following days, the full picture arrived, piece by piece, each worse than the last. Her bank card was declined. The account was frozen under the guardianship filing. Henri's widow pension, reliably on the 15th of every month for 2 years, had been redirected to Sylvie's account. Not suspended, redirected. She asked the bank clerk to confirm it. He confirmed it twice, looking at his screen rather than at her. The insurance company told her she had been removed from the house policy 6 days ago. 63 euros in her coat pocket, a winter arriving, and no address that was legally hers. She found the motel by accident. She had taken a bus toward Crémieux to be somewhere that was not the spare room and not close enough to Rue des Acacias to be dangerous. Le Relais du Pont sat just off the main road on the edge of the village. A low building, 12 rooms, a gravel car park, and a handwritten card in the window that said Nettoyage et Recherche. The owner was Fernand, a widower in his late 60s, solidly built, with the bearing of a man who had done physical work most of his life. He met her at the side door and said, I pay cash at the end of each day. I don't ask for documents. Can you start tomorrow? She started the next morning. The work required precision, which she had. She cleaned 12 rooms between 7 and noon, restocked the linens, scrubbed tiles with the focused attention of someone who finds relief in controllable things. Fernand left 40 euros on the counter at 1 o'clock. She said yes and meant it. In the evenings, she returned to Madeleine's porch and sat with tea going cold in her hands and thought about Henri's words until she could hear them in his exact voice. Look under the front porch. Promise me you won't forget. She had not forgotten. She was more certain each day that whatever he had left there was not merely an object, it was a decision. Henri did not do things without purpose. He had placed something there deliberately, and it was meant to reach her and no one else. but Sylvie had changed the locks within a week of the notary appointment. She had also installed a security camera above the front entrance, small, angled downward, its red indicator light pulsing steadily from a position that covered the full width of the porch. Colette walked past her own house one evening. The kitchen light was on. Through the window, she could see Sylvie moving along the far wall with a roller. Long, even strokes, painting over the pale yellow Colette had chosen in 2009. The new color was white, flat and clean and belonging to someone else entirely. She stood on the opposite pavement until Sylvie moved out of view. Then she turned and walked back the way she had come. She needed to get under that porch. She simply did not yet know how. Madeleine had a fall in October. Nothing broken, but enough to make clear she needed more care than a neighbor could provide. Her daughter was already arranging a placement near Bourg-en-Bresse. Madeleine told Colette she was sorry. Colette told her she had nothing to be sorry for. Both of them knew it was true on both counts. Fernand heard about it between rooms one morning. He said there was a storage room at the back of the building, behind the laundry, a concrete floor, a socket, a cold tap, a window that faced the field, unused for 2 years. If she wanted to make something of it, she could stay. He would take nothing from her wages. She spent a Sunday on it, moved broken furniture out, swept the floor twice, stretched curtain fabric across the door frame on a tension rod she found in the laundry. A folding bed from the second-hand depot in Crémier carried in pieces on the bus. Fernand helped with the hot plate without comment. She set a wooden crate on its end for a table, put her 2 books on top, placed her toothbrush on the windowsill, and looked at the room. It was small, cold in the mornings. Hers. Marcel Aubert checked into room 7 every few weeks when there was odd work nearby. Walls to repoint, a chimney to inspect, a floor to relay. He was in his mid-70s, a retired mason with white hands and a deliberate way of speaking, the kind of man who finishes each sentence before beginning the next. He took his coffee in the breakfast room at 7, and so did Colette after her first round of rooms. He said the coffee was thin. She told him it was always thin. He poured a second cup anyway. They talked gradually, the way 2 people talk when each is carrying something and has grown too tired to carry it entirely alone. She told him about Henri. He told her about his wife, gone 11 years. He did not ask why she was living in a storage room. She was grateful for this in a way she could not quite put into words. She told him about the porch on a December morning when the field outside was white with frost and the breakfast room was empty. Not everything, just that her late husband had hidden something beneath the boards of their old house and she could not get to it. The locks had been changed. A camera covered the entrance. Marcel wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at the table. Then he said, "I know how to lift old boards without noise. You work with the grain, not against it. Takes longer, but the wood doesn't complain." He asked which side the camera covered. She described it. He asked about the garden wall on the left, where the porch met it at an angle. She said yes. He nodded and said nothing more. On a Thursday in January, just past 3 in the morning, they drove to Rue des Acacias in Marcel's truck. A light rain was falling, quiet enough to muffle sound, steady enough to keep the street empty. The corner streetlight had just cycled off. Marcel went in from the left along the garden wall, staying below the camera's angle. He worked with a pry bar and a folded cloth, finding the edge of each board with his fingers before using any tool. The wood did not complain. Colette knelt in the wet earth beneath the lifted boards and dug with her hands. The soil was cold and dense and smelled of clay and old roots. Her fingers found something flat and solid, not stone, not root, a hard edge and the smooth pull of sealed tape. She worked it free with both hands and lifted it into the rain. A metal ammunition box, military surplus, the lid sealed with tape that had yellowed but held. Marcel replaced the 3 boards exactly as they had been, pressing each flat with his palm. They walked to the truck. He pulled out at a steady pace, unhurried, unremarkable. Behind them, the streetlight clicked back on, and orange light spread across Rue des Acacias, falling on a porch that looked exactly as it always had, and beneath which there was now nothing left to find. The box sat on the wooden crate that served as her table, still wet from the rain. Colette's hands were dark with mud to the wrists. She did not wash them. She pulled the tape from the lid in one long strip and opened the metal box. Inside, laid in order, a sealed envelope in Henri's handwriting, the particular slant she had known for 38 years, the H slightly larger than the rest. A rusted key on a wire loop with a paper number tag. A folded document, official and stamped, with a heading she could not read without her glasses. And a small cloth pouch, drawstring pulled tight, the fabric faded but intact. She opened the pouch first. A gold wedding band slid into her palm. Not her own, she still wore hers. This one was narrower, older, the inside worn smooth. Henri's mother's ring. She closed her fingers around it. Then she opened the letter. 2 pages, both sides, his handwriting growing smaller toward the end where space ran short. She read it twice. The first time too fast, catching only fragments. 1991, my father, the hills above Perouge, your maiden name. The second time she read every sentence. In 1991, 3 years before their marriage, Henri's father had left him a small piece of land in the hills east of Perouge. A slope, some stone, 2 walnut trees, the remnant of a shepherd's shelter. Henri had never built on it. He had paid the land tax every year and told no one. He had not told Sylvie, not once, not ever. He had registered the land in Colette's maiden name, Colette Brun, as a formal gift, notarized in 1997. He wrote, "The house on Rue des Acacias was always in my name. I never found a way to make that right. I wanted you to have something that was only yours, not ours, yours. Something with your name alone on it, something no one could reach by reaching through me." He wrote, "I hope you never need it. I hope you are reading this in some ordinary moment and laughing at how seriously I took something that turned out not to matter. But if you need it, Colette, it is there. It has always been there." She read that paragraph a 3rd time. The key belonged to a storage unit in Villeurbanne, number 114, the tag said. Inside, a toolbox, personal papers, and the original notarized deed. Henri had written the address in the margin in his careful hand. Colette sat on the folding bed with the ring in one hand and the letter in the other. The hot plate ticked. Rain moved steadily across the field outside. She had spent 3 months feeling like something that had been set aside, sorted into a category of people who require management rather than consideration, filed there by a daughter who had decided what she was before asking who she had been. She had cleaned strangers' rooms, slept behind a curtain, stood across the street from her own window and watched her kitchen walls painted over in a color she had not chosen. Now she sat with mud on her hands and a letter from a dead man who had known, not the precise facts, not the notary, not Sylvie, but the shape of the risk. He had understood that love was not enough without ground to stand on, and so he had left her ground. A knock at the curtain. Marcel's voice low. "Are you all right in there?" She stood and pulled the curtain aside. He leaned against the wall with a dead cigarette between his fingers, coat damp across the shoulders. He looked at her face and did not ask again. She said, "He left me land." Marcel looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, not with surprise, simply with recognition, the way a man acknowledges something that has arrived where it was always going. He said, Then we should get some sleep. She said yes. He walked back to room 7. She closed the curtain, lay down on the folding bed with the ring still in her hand, and did not move until morning. The storage unit in Villeurbanne sat on a grey industrial street behind the ring road. Unit 114 opened on the 3rd try. The lock had stiffened over time. Inside smelled of metal and undisturbed air. The toolbox was there. Inside it, Henri's work journal, spiral-bound, water-stained at the lower corner. Beneath the journal, an envelope marked Original Deed, Do Not Fold. And beneath that, a second letter with no name on the front, only the words, To whoever tries to take this from her. She put everything in her bag and sat for a moment on the concrete step outside. The second letter she did not open yet. It was enough to know it existed. She took a bus to Perouge, alone on a Tuesday in late January. The village was quiet. A medieval hill town, stone walls, a small square, no tourists in the cold month. She walked past the last houses and followed the path Henri had described in the journal. Left at the broken gate, uphill along the tree line, roughly 400 meters to a collapsed stone wall. She found it. 1,200 square meters of hillside sloping east, open to the Ain valley below. The land was overgrown, bramble, tall grass, a line of young ash along the northern edge. The collapsed wall ran the lower boundary, its stones fallen but mostly present. 2 walnut trees stood near the center, old and wide, reaching in every direction with the patience of things that have been growing for a very long time. She walked the perimeter slowly. The ground was uneven underfoot. Clay and stone, she noted, holds water but drains well on the slope. She sat on an upright section of wall and looked out at the valley for a long time without thinking about anything specific. Henri had stood on this ground. He had paid its tax every year, driven past this hill on the road to Lyon, and kept this silence for 27 years. She could not be angry with him. She understood it completely. He had been protecting something by keeping it separate. A thing registered only in her name, reachable only if you knew it was there. This was not a financial arrangement, not an investment. Something simpler and more fundamental. If everything is taken from you, here is a place where you can put your feet on the ground, and the ground belongs to no one else. She returned to Crémieux and asked Fernand if he knew a lawyer for land matters. He gave her a name, Audrey Clavel, recently established in Bourg-en-Bresse, said to be thorough. Colette called that afternoon and was given an appointment for Friday. Audrey was 34. With reading glasses she kept pushing up with one finger and the efficient manner of someone who learned early not to waste a question. She examined the deed, the registration document, Henri's letter, the notarized gift certificate from 1997. She asked 3 questions, spent 11 minutes in the land registry, then set her glasses on the desk. The land is registered in your maiden name, she said. It predates the marriage by 3 years. It falls entirely outside the scope of the guardianship. That filing covers marital assets only. This land carries your name alone. It always has. Can you confirm it officially? Colette said. File whatever is needed to establish my access. Audrey said she could, and she would. That evening, Colette sat in the storage room with the second letter, to whoever tries to take this from her, still sealed on the crate in front of her. She was thinking about the walnut trees, the collapsed wall, 1,200 square meters of hillside with her maiden name quietly attached to every meter of it. Her phone rang. She did not recognize the number at first. Then she did. Sylvie's voice came with a particular lightness, the calibrated, pleasant register of someone gathering information without wanting you to notice. Maman, she said, someone told me you've been asking about property records at the mairie. I thought that was strange. What exactly is going on? Colette looked at the sealed envelope on the crate. Nothing to worry about, she said. and she ended the call. She sat still for a moment. Then she placed the envelope carefully between the pages of Henri's work journal and thought, soon. They arrived 2 days after the phone call. Colette was finishing the last room on the morning round when Fernand appeared in the corridor and said quietly that there was a woman outside asking for her. He said it the way he said most things, flatly, without opinion, but he stayed near the door while she went out. Sylvie stood in the gravel car park in a dark coat, her expression arranged into something between worry and resignation. The performance had been adjusted since the notary's office. Less tenderness now, more duty. Grégoire sat in the car with the window half down, a phone pressed to his ear, not looking at either of them. "You're living here," Sylvie said. It wasn't a question. She was looking past Colette at the building, at the sign above the entrance, at the detail of the place, cataloguing it. "I work here," Colette said. "Maman, we are worried. You're making decisions alone, without anyone who understands your situation. You're cleaning rooms in a roadside motel. You're living in a..." She paused, searching for the right word. "A storage facility." "I'm living in a room," Colette said. "It has a window and a door, and it belongs to no one but me. That puts it ahead of the last place I had." Sylvie looked at her. The worry expression held, but something behind it shifted slightly, recalibrating. She said, "You need to think about what you're doing." And then, "We should talk about this properly, as a family." Colette said nothing. Sylvie waited. When it became clear there was no more coming, she said she would call, and went back to the car. Grégoire reversed into the road without looking up from his phone. Fernand was still at the door. He said, "She looked at the room." Colette said, "Yes." He handed her the mop she had left in the corridor. She finished the last room. Within a week, the motion arrived through Audrey, a filing with the court requesting an extension of the guardianship order to encompass any undisclosed assets belonging to Colette Morel. The language cited Colette's behavior as evidence. Her decision to perform manual cleaning work rather than seek appropriate assisted housing. Her choice to live in a storage room on commercial premises. Her contacts with individuals unknown to the family. All of it presented as proof of an inability to manage her affairs with appropriate judgment. Audrey called on a Thursday evening and went through it without softening. "The motion is weak," she said. "The legal basis is thin. But weak motions take months, and court time is limited. If the judge appoints an evaluator who comes in sympathetic to the family's framing, the process becomes significantly harder to reverse. They're not trying to win this motion. They're trying to slow everything down and make the land question expensive." "How expensive?" Colette said. "In time," Audrey said. "Months, possibly more." Colette sat for a while after the call. Marcel was in the breakfast room working through a crossword. She told him what Audrey had said. He listened without interrupting, then set the pen down and said he knew someone. A retired social worker who had handled elder abuse cases for 20 years, now living in Amberieu. She was not easy to reach, but she was worth reaching. Her name was Thérèse. She arrived by train on a Saturday, and they met in a café near the Crémieux Square. A woman in her late 60s, deliberately dressed, who ordered water and listened without a notebook. Colette told her everything in order. The notary, the pen, the pension redirected within 48 hours, the house insurance, the camera above the porch, the box in the wet earth, the deed with her maiden name, the motion to extend guardianship filed the moment Sylvie understood that something had been found. Thérèse sat with it quietly for a moment. Then she said, "This is not protection. This is theft with a signature." She said it plainly, without drama, as someone who had named the same thing many times before and wanted it heard without embellishment. She spent the following week in careful preparation. Together with Audrey, she helped Colette file a counter-complaint with the Procureur de la République, not challenging the land motion, but targeting the original guardianship itself. The complaint requested a full review of how the guardianship had been obtained. Specifically, the pension transfer completed within 48 hours of filing, the removal of Colette from the house insurance before the order was even formalized, and, most precisely, the medical evaluation submitted to the notary as the document's foundation. That evaluation, Therese said, is where everything starts. If it was manipulated, nothing built on top of it is clean. Audrey obtained the records within 10 days. 2 documents arrived side by side on her desk. The original medical report filed by Dr. Fauvel, a general practitioner in Lyon's 7th arrondissement, and the version submitted to the notary as part of the guardianship application. She called Colette and read them both aloud. In the original, Colette Morel presents mild signs of age-related forgetfulness, not inconsistent with her age group. No findings indicative of diminished capacity. In the version submitted to the notary, Colette Morel presents mild signs of age-related forgetfulness, inconsistent with her age group. 3 letters had been removed. The word not. What remained inverted the meaning of every sentence that followed. Colette sat in the breakfast room with the motel empty around her and listened to Audrey read both versions a second time. The difference was a small space of silence in the original, a 3-letter word that meant the doctor had found nothing unusual, nothing requiring intervention, nothing that could support a guardianship claim.
Without it, the report said the opposite. She looked at the 2 texts for a long time.
7 letters changed. 3 of those letters had changed her house, her pension, her name on a policy, her bank card, a winter in a storage room behind a curtain. Audrey contacted Dr. Fauvel that afternoon. He called back within 2 hours. He was not calm. He confirmed the original wording without hesitation and said he would provide a sworn statement without being asked twice. He said he had never been informed that his report was submitted in any legal proceeding. He said he had written what he found, a woman of 63 with the perfectly ordinary mild forgetfulness of a woman of 63, and he had not written anything else. He said, "Someone changed my report." That evening, Colette's phone rang at 9:30. She recognized the number. Sylvie's voice had changed. The practiced warmth was gone. What remained was flatter and harder, like a surface with the finish worn away. "You're making a mistake, Maman. You're going to embarrass the whole family. Everything I did was because I was worried about you. I was trying to help." Colette looked at the window. The field outside was dark and still. "You removed 1 word from a doctor's report," she said. "That is not help." The line went quiet. Not the pause of someone preparing an answer, the silence of something stopping. She heard Sylvie breathing on the other end of the line. 1 second, 3, 5. Then the call ended. Colette set the phone face down on the crate and sat without moving. She thought about what Therese had said. Not protection, theft with a signature. She thought about Dr. Fauvel's voice on the phone, the particular anger of a man who understood that someone had put words in his report that he had not written and used them to take a woman's house. She thought about the courtroom that was coming. Sylvie had tried the notary's office with tenderness. She had tried the guardianship extension with legal language and calculated delay. She had tried the car park visit with concern arranged carefully on her face. None of it had held. What came next would not be soft. Colette understood that. She had understood it, she thought, since the moment she stood on the hillside in Perouge and felt the wind coming off the Aisne Valley, and knew that the ground beneath her had always carried her name. She was not afraid of what was coming. She was ready for it to be over. The courtroom was pale walls, pale light from high windows, the kind of room designed to feel neither hostile nor welcoming, simply formal. Colette had arrived early and sat in the corridor for 20 minutes before the doors opened. She had ironed her blouse at the motel the night before, pressing each section flat against the board with the concentration she usually gave to difficult things. It was pale blue, bought years ago for a cousin's wedding. It still fit. Audrey sat beside her at the left table with 3 folders arranged in order of use. Across the aisle, Sylvie and Grégoire sat with a private attorney from Lyon, a tall man in a dark suit who arranged his own papers with the practiced Henri of someone paid by the hour and not worried about the total. Marcel was in the gallery, 3rd row. He had put on a collar shirt. When Colette glanced back before the judge entered, he gave her a single nod and looked at the front of the room. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Henriette Morand. She entered without ceremony and sat and began. Sylvie's attorney went first. He built the argument in careful layers. Colette's isolation, her instability, her susceptibility to outside influence. He described her situation, a 63-year-old woman working as a cleaning operative at a roadside motel, sleeping in a converted storage room, having recently retrieved documents from beneath the floorboards of a property to which she no longer held legal access. He used the word erratic 3 times. He described the land claim as something that had emerged suspiciously quickly, shaped by individuals with unknown motivations who had inserted themselves into a vulnerable woman's affairs. At this point, he turned and gestured toward the gallery with a slight incline of his head, toward Marcel, sitting in the 3rd row in his collared shirt. Unknown outside influence, the attorney said. A man she met weeks ago. A man whose relationship to Madame Morel has never been formally established. Marcel looked at the attorney without expression. Audrey waited until he had finished. Then she opened the first folder. She placed the 2 versions of the medical report side by side and read both aloud, clearly, once. The original. Colette Morel presents mild signs of age-related forgetfulness, not inconsistent with her age group. No findings indicative of diminished capacity. The submitted version. The word not removed, the meaning reversed. The clinical finding transformed into its opposite without altering any other word on the page. She submitted Dr. Fauvel's sworn statement in which he confirmed the original wording, stated he had never been informed his report was used in a legal guardianship proceeding, and confirmed that his findings had not supported and would not have supported such a filing. She submitted bank records. Henri's widow pension, received by Colette for 2 continuous years, transferred to Sylvie Moreau's account 41 hours after the guardianship order was signed. Not after a processing delay. 41 hours. She submitted a letter from Fernand Roche, owner of Le Relais du Pont in Crémieux, dated 3 weeks prior. It stated that Colette Morel had worked for him since October, that she was punctual, thorough, and reliable, that she had never once failed to complete her work, and that, in his assessment, she was one of the most capable people he had employed. He had signed it with his full name and pressed it flat so the ink was even. The judge read each document without comment. Then she set her pen down and looked at the table across the aisle. Madame Moreau, she said, were you aware of the discrepancy between the medical report filed with this court and the original document produced by Dr. Fauvel? Sylvie's hands were folded in front of her on the table. She held the position for a moment, steady, composed, and then she looked at Grégoire. A brief look, less than a second. The judge saw it. I trusted the process, Sylvie said. I did not personally review every document. We relied on legal guidance throughout. The judge made a note. Then she looked at Grégoire. Monsieur Moreau, the same question. Grégoire sat back slightly. He looked at his attorney. The attorney leaned close and said something that was not audible across the room. Grégoire straightened and said, I prefer not to answer that question without my own legal representation present. The judge looked at him for a measured interval. She wrote something. Then she gathered the documents before her, aligned them against the edge of the bench, and began. The guardianship order filed in October of the preceding year is hereby annulled. The filing was based on a medical evaluation that does not reflect the findings of the physician who produced it. No legitimate medical evidence of incapacity has been established. Colette Morel's pension will be restored immediately and in full, with arrears to be calculated and transferred within 30 days. She paused. The court further orders an independent audit of the property transfer made under the terms of the annulled guardianship. The speed with which financial redirections were executed following the initial filing raises questions this court is not positioned to resolve today, but which cannot be left unexamined. She looked up from the document. The protection of a parent, she said, should never become the instrument of her dispossession. She closed the folder. Colette sat very still. Audrey put a hand briefly on her arm. From the gallery there was no sound. Sylvie's attorney was writing something. Grégoire was looking at the table. Outside, on the pavement in front of the courthouse, Marcel was already waiting. He had left during the final statement and stood now with his coat buttoned and his hands in his pockets. He looked at her face when she came through the door. She said, "It's done." He said, "All of it?" She said, "The pension is restored. There's an audit on the house." He nodded and looked at the street. Then he said, "Coffee or straight back?" She said, "Coffee." Then straight back. "I have rooms to finish." Spring arrived the way it arrives in that part of France. Slowly at first, a degree at a time. Then all at once and certain. The field outside the storage room window turned from grey to pale green in the space of 2 weeks. Colette noticed it the morning she packed the folding bed. She had given Fernand 3 weeks' notice. He had accepted it without comment and had given her the last month's wages rounded up to an even sum, pressing the bills flat on the counter the way he did. She thanked him. He said she should send bread if it turned out well. She said she would. Marcel drove her to Perouge with everything she owned in 4 boxes and a folded blanket. They cleared the access path first, cutting back the bramble with tools borrowed from a house in the village below. Then they turned to the land itself. The brush was dense but not unmanageable. 2 weeks of mornings, cut it back from the center outward, working in sections, leaving the established plants, the nettles at the base of the walnut trees, the wild thyme running along the upper wall. The old stone wall at the lower edge of the plot was collapsed across a 12-meter stretch. Marcel walked it twice, picking up stones and setting them back down, reading the original structure from what remained. "We can rebuild this," he said. "The footing is still good. Someone knew what they were doing when they laid it." They worked the wall section by section through April. Marcel set the larger stones and Colette mortared between them, learning the pressure from watching his hands. By the end of the month, a solid 8 meters stood rebuilt. Not decorative, functional, the way old walls are functional, holding the slope back from the garden space below. She planted seeds from the market in the village, potatoes deep in the clay-heavy soil, shallots along the upper bed, thyme and lettuce in a raised frame Marcel built from salvaged timber. The walnut trees were already leafing out above her. She worked in the mornings while the light came from the east across the valley and ate lunch sitting on the rebuilt wall looking at the Ain below. The oven came from Henri's work journal. A clay construction on a stone base, the proportions handwritten in the margin of a page from 1988, with small corrections in a different pen made later. Marcel built the base from flat local stone, while Colette mixed clay and straw into a working paste. The dome went up over 3 days, drying between sessions in the spring air. The first fire ran for 4 hours without bread, seasoning the clay, letting the structure settle. She baked the first loaf on a Saturday in early May. It came out too dense, the crust too dark. She noted the temperature and the timing and adjusted. The second loaf was better. The third was what she had been aiming for. Open crumb, crust that sounded right when you knocked it with a knuckle. Odile came from the hamlet below, a woman in her mid-50s who walked with the directness of someone on agricultural land. She appeared at the edge of the plot one Tuesday morning and stood looking at the garden and the oven and Colette as if assessing all three. She had brought 3 eggs in a cloth. She asked if the bread was worth trading for. Colette gave her half a loaf and took the eggs. Odile came back the following week with 6 eggs and a jar of honey from her neighbor's hive. The week after that, she brought her cousin, who said nothing but stood eating the heel of a loaf with the expression of someone revising an opinion. Word moved through the hamlet and then through the surrounding area the way such things move in small places. Sideways, without announcement, carried in passing sentences at the end of conversations about other things. Colette set up a table at the end of the access path on weekend mornings. Bread wrapped in cloth, bundles of thyme and dried savory from the upper bed, walnut oil Marcel pressed from the previous autumn's harvest, slow work done in stages, yielding a small quantity that tasted of the specific trees on this specific hill. Jars of preserved tomatoes put up from the plants along the south wall. The first month brought modest income. Less than the motel had paid, but the motel had not given her this. A woman from the village learning her name and using it, saying it as she pointed out the table to her sister. A man who came 3 weekends in a row and on the 3rd said the sourdough was the best he had eaten in this area, and he had grown up in this area. Children who stood at the table looking at the jars of tomatoes with the focused curiosity children bring to things that are handmade and visible in their process. She was known here.
Not as Sylvie's mother, not as the woman from the notary's office, not as the cleaner from Le Relais du Pont, as the woman on the hill, as Colette. Audrey called on an afternoon in late May while Colette was covering the table for rain. "The audit is complete," Audrey said. "They found what we expected and more. A portion of your redirected pension," she named the amount, which was substantial, "was transferred from Sylvie's account to a business account registered to Gregoire's construction firm within 8 weeks of the guardianship filing. The timing is unambiguous. The amounts are documented. It's been referred to the financial prosecutor's office." Colette held the phone and looked at the valley below. The rain had reached the far edge of it, moving slowly this way. "What does that mean for the house?" she said. "The audit is the basis," Audrey said. "The house transfer will be challenged as part of the broader case. I can't give you a timeline, but the direction is clear." Colette thanked her and said goodnight. She finished covering the table and walked back up the path to where the oven still held warmth from the afternoon bake. She sat on the wall Marcel had helped her rebuild, stone by stone, through the whole of April. Below her, the valley was going grey with rain. The walnut trees moved in the wind coming up the slope. Gregoire had used her money to pay his debts. She had cleaned his rooms, slept behind a curtain, and his name was in a file on a financial prosecutor's desk. She did not feel the satisfaction she had thought she might feel. She felt something quieter and more final, the particular stillness of a thing that has been set in motion and will now simply proceed. She went inside to start the evening fire. The cottage had taken 6 months from foundation to roof. They had laid the first stones in May, working from the collapsed shepherd's shelter as a starting point, its footing still true, its corners still square beneath the fallen upper courses. Marcel read the original structure the way he read all old things, with patience, following what was already there rather than imposing what was new. Colette learned to dress stone by watching his hands and then doing it herself until it looked the same. By August, the walls stood at full height. By September, the roof was on. Timber frame, clay tile, a single chimney at the east end. By October, there was a fireplace that drew cleanly, a kitchen corner with a shelf and a basin, and a porch of flat stone facing the valley below. 1 room, 16 square meters, every stone placed by hand. She moved in on the 1st of November, with a folding chair, a proper bed replacing the old one, and Henri's work journal on the shelf above the basin. Marcel had built the shelf from walnut.
a piece salvaged from a branch that had come down in the September wind. It was the right wood for this place, she thought. It belonged here. Odile's cousin ran a small provision shop in the village. In September, she had asked whether Colette would supply regularly. Bread twice a week, preserves when available, the walnut oil in small bottles. Colette said yes. By October, the bread sold out before noon on both days. A journalist from a regional paper came up the hill one afternoon and asked if he could write a short piece. Colette said she would rather he didn't. He wrote it anyway. The grandmother who rebuilt her life on a hillside. And it ran on a Tuesday. She did not read it. 40,000 people did. The fire was going on a grey afternoon in late November when she heard a car stop at the bottom of the path. She did not look out immediately. Visitors came on weekends. This was a Wednesday. She heard footsteps on the path. Slow. Not the quick step of someone who knew the way. She set down the bread she was scoring and stood at the window. Sylvie was thinner. She wore a dark coat Colette did not recognize, her hair pulled back without the careful attention it usually received. She was not wearing her ring. She walked up the path, looking at the ground, and stopped at the edge of the garden where the rebuilt wall met the gate. She stood there for a moment before she looked up. "Maman," she said. Her voice was different without the rehearsed registers. No tenderness, no lightness, no calibrated concern, just a voice. "I have nowhere to go." Colette opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The air was cold and the valley below was the color of pewter under the low cloud. She looked at her daughter. She saw both things at once. The girl who used to fall asleep against Henri's shoulder on Sunday evenings, her shoes still on, one arm across his coat, and the woman who had stood in a notary's office and pressed a pen into her mother's hand, who had changed the locks before the ink was dry, who had taken 3 letters from a doctor's sentence and built a legal structure on their absence. She looked at Sylvie for a long time. "You took my house," she said, "my pension, my name on an insurance document. You changed a doctor's letter so that a notary would believe I had lost my mind. You redirected the money Henri left me so that your husband could pay his debts with it. And now you are standing in the only place your father made sure you could never touch." Sylvie did not move. She held Colette's eyes and said nothing. The wind came up the slope from the valley and moved through the walnut trees. Colette looked at her daughter one more moment. She saw what was there and she saw what was gone, and she understood that these were now the same thing. She stepped back inside. She pulled the door closed behind her, not with force, not with speed. The way you close a door when the room on the other side of it is finally finished. The latch caught. The fire moved in the grate. Outside, the valley held its grey light, and the path ran down the hill to the road, and the road ran on to wherever Sylvie had come from. Colette picked up the bread and finished scoring it and slid it into the oven.